Hey guys, Rob Sambles here from Rob Sambles Photography. So my next video, I wanted to do a proper kind of video like I've been doing before. I don't know, maybe you'd call it tips, maybe you'd call it just kind of seeing what I do, whatever it is. I've done a couple of, I guess, update videos and a couple of videos talking about my behind the scenes stuff. So I wanted to do another just kind of regular video really. So this video is going to be about something which I've had a couple of people kind of ask me about. Sometimes it's been in bits, like I've had random comments asking about what settings I used for a photo, or maybe what settings I like to use for sports, or what shooting mode I use, or what kind of shutter speed I aim for. And I've had a few emails just asking about sports photography camera settings in general. So I thought I'd do a video about camera settings for sports. Now, the first and biggest thing I'm going to say, this video won't be telling you what settings you should use for sports. The video is saying what settings I generally use for sports. There won't be spending any time in the video trying to argue to you that it's the best way to do it, or trying to tell you that any particular settings are the best settings you can use, because that isn't true. They're the settings that I use, they're the settings that I prefer. A lot of that has come from the venues that I shoot in, my own experience of trying loads of different settings, other people's opinions. I'll be honest, I've used loads of other people's opinions on what they do and different things to try. Some which I've got used to venues, so like I shoot a lot of my basketball in the same venue, I shoot a lot of my football in the same handful of venues, and I've got used to the settings that I need in those situations based on the lights or the environment that I'm shooting in. So these are settings that I like to use, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to set up the camera in a second behind the camera so you can actually see the back of the camera as I'm talking through what I use, and see the screen to give you a bit more of an idea what I'm talking about. Obviously these settings are all related to my Canon cameras. Generally speaking, obviously some things are the same, shutter speeds or whatever, it doesn't matter what brand of camera you're using, but some things are quite particular. So like Nikon cameras and Canon cameras might use slightly different phrases for different focus settings and things like that. So obviously this is all going to be based around Canon camera settings, just in case that causes any confusion. So I hope you enjoy the video, guys. Let me know and let's see how we go. Alright, I'm going to set up the video now so you can see the back of the camera. Cool. Okay guys, here we go. So we've got the set up on the back of the camera now so you guys can see what's going on here, and I'll talk you through some of the settings in a moment. One of the things I want to just quickly talk about first is the way I use my memory cards. Now I have dual card slots in here. I've got the CF cards and I've got the SD card as well. Now at the moment I'm using mostly these anyway, Lexar 800 times, oh you can see my reflection in there, 800 times 8 gig cards, and then the SD card is a much bigger one, is a 64 gig card. Now the reason I do that is this one stays in the whole game and the CF cards change out through the course of the game, and that's the way that I do it, just for my backups and things like that. There's other ways you could do it, guys, that's just generally what I do. So going into the settings themselves, now these settings on here aren't exactly what I would always use. I've just kind of done this so you can see the back of the screen really. Now the first thing to talk about is the shooting mode. Now at the moment it's set on manual, we can see up here. I've just done that because if I change it to another mode, you can see some of the, bulb I would never use, but so it changes and some of the settings disappear from the screen. So I've set this to manual mode right now so that you can just see all the settings on the screen there. Now, I'll be honest, I don't always shoot in manual mode. There'll be lots of people out there who almost will look down on not always shooting manual. I think that's ridiculous. I will often, for example, use AV mode or aperture priority mode when I'm shooting a daytime football game, because I know that then I can just worry about keeping my f-stop where I want it, to down at 2.8 generally, or sometimes f4, and the shutter speed will take care of itself. I keep an eye on it to make sure it's high enough, but if you're out there on a sunny day, you don't have to worry. It's going to be real high. It's going to be like 2,000th of a second or something like that. So, I'm a big believer that these cameras are built in a very clever way, and it seems stupid not to take advantage of some of the settings that they have sometimes. That said, I will shoot manual a lot of the time, especially if I'm indoors doing basketball, or maybe if I'm shooting under floodlights or something like that, where I know it's going to be fairly consistent with the lighting and perhaps I want to make sure it's just right for me. I will shoot in manual. Now, let's move on to the shutter speed. Now, generally speaking, for shutter speed, I will always try to keep this at around 1,000th of a second. You can get away with 800th of a second if I have to. Sometimes if the lighting is really, really tough and I'm really struggling and I don't want the ISO level to creep up to anything silly, then you know what, I might even go as low as like 1/640th, especially if it's like youth football or something like that. It doesn't move as fast. Something like basketball, 800th is about as low as I would want it to go. Generally, I'm aiming for a 1,000th of a second just because it's such a fast moving sport. So my aperture, in simple terms, I will get this as low as I can get it normally. With football, I generally will shoot at f2.8. Sometimes I'll shoot at f4. I mean, I used to predominantly use an f4 lens, so I used to always be shooting at f4, but I still will quite often shoot at f4 if it's a really bright sunny day, and perhaps I just want a bit more focus. You know, maybe I've got two players in the shot, you know, and I want to make sure they're both in focus, then I'll go with f4. Normally a bit lower if I'm shooting again under tough light. So let's say the lighting indoors at a basketball venue is really, really tough and I'm already down to 800th. I've got the ISO kind of as high as I generally would want it to be, and I'm starting to think, God, you know, I'm struggling still. Then I would go even lower. Now, this lens I've got in here at the moment actually would go all the way down to f1.8. I think that's a bit too much for basketball. I would struggle. So I perhaps would normally go to like kind of 2.5, maybe 2.2, something like that. Okay, so sorry guys, I was having some troubles. I was recording that video on my iPhone and it was just causing me grief. So I've switched over. We're now recording this on my Canon 7D, my Mark 1. So I was just getting onto ISO levels. Now, as a general rule, I will try to keep the ISO level as low as I possibly can. Now, that means that if I'm outside shooting a daytime game, and I can achieve, you know, the exact shutter speed that I want and the exact f-stop that I want, and I only need ISO 100 to do that because it's a bright sunny day, then that's what I will do. If I need it to be 200, it will be 200. If I need it to be 400, it will be 400, but it will be as low as I can possibly get it. In some situations, like indoor shooting basketball, that means it needs to be right up, maybe even 4,000. Actually, most of the basketball venues I do, I can get away with kind of 3,200, 4,000 if I have to. But before now, I've had to go to kind of 8,000 when I absolutely had to. But I don't generally like to go much higher than this with a 72. So that's when I then start to tweak down my shutter speed or bring down my f-stop a little bit more if I have to, in order to not get this going too high. So that's ISO. White balance, which is down here. White balance, now generally speaking, I will keep this on auto. The auto white balance I find with the 72 is very good. Some people might disagree, but I find it's good. And I can always adjust it afterwards. In Lightroom, I mostly shoot in RAW, which I'll get onto in a second. But if I have to, sometimes on the indoor venues, if I'm checking it out and it looks a little bit dodgy, then I might change it. Sometimes I might need the white fluorescent light setting just to get it about right, and then again I can play with it afterwards anyway. But mostly I do shoot auto white balance, especially outdoors in the middle of the day. Now, in terms of, I just mentioned that I shoot RAW, and you guys can see down here in the bottom right-hand corner, I shoot RAW. Now, look, there's a big argument about RAW versus JPEG, and people will tell you all kinds of different things about that, I suppose. I'm not going to argue that case either way. There's advantages of both. I always have shot RAW. I like the fact to shoot RAW. Now, I will put a bit of an asterisk on the end of that and say there is one exception. I will sometimes, and you can see now it's gone to 2, it's because I'm shooting RAW to both memory cards. Sometimes, if I'm shooting for a sports agency, a picture agency, like a wire service, I will shoot to JPEG. The reason being I would do JPEG then, just because it's quicker. The files will upload into Lightroom quicker. I don't have to do a huge amount of editing because it's only just sports photos to get out to a wire service. I'm just tweaking contrast, perhaps a quick crop, things like that. And so a lot of the advantages you would get from shooting with a RAW file I don't utilise anyway. The files are smaller with JPEG and they're just quicker to work with, and that's why sometimes I would do it if I'm shooting for a sports agency where I'm literally sending the images out live. But mostly I do shoot RAW, guys. So the focus mode, I will always shoot servo mode, so continuous focus basically. That for me works better for sports, and I'm always shooting that way. I'm focusing with the back button, guys, so up here. Now I use back button focus. up here. Anyone who doesn't know how to set their camera to back button focus, it's funny. You know what, I'll be honest, when I first started out in photography, I didn't know you could do this. I was focusing using the half the press on the shutter button. I use back button focus, as I think probably most sports photographers do. But that works for me, and that is probably one of the biggest single things that I learned as a sports photographer, was to use back button focus. I find it just so much better. We're in focus here. Yeah, we are. So what else have I touched on? Shooting mode. I shoot high-speed continuous mode, so I can just get loads of frames off very quick. You know, it's the way to machine gun it, and it makes sure that you can get the you know, the photos quicker, and you can get that peak moment that you want in your sports photos. Now, I'm going to do a written blog post on this, guys. Now, if you guys go to my website, which I'll bring it on the bottom of the screen just here, but it's also up on the end and on the beginning of all my videos anyway. I'm doing a written blog post that talks about this a lot more. I'm going to talk about the lenses I use, the bodies I use, my memory cards, all the different settings, so to give you guys a much better insight into it, hopefully, if you want to check that out as well as the video. One other quick thing just to touch on, I suppose, is with the lenses that I use. Now, a lot of the lenses I use do have image stabilization. This one here, for example, this is my 7200 Canon, which does. You'll see it's turned off. It generally is always turned off for sports photography. You know, there's an argument then, well, why did I buy the one with the image stabilization? I suppose because in case I ever want it for anything else, portraits or something like that. And also the reality of it is that this lens throughout is a slightly better quality lens than the non-IS version. So I bought the version with it, but I will have it turned off for sports photography, as is the case with any of my lenses that have image stabilization. Okay, guys, so I hope you found that interesting. I hope I covered most things. I'm worried I may have missed something really important, but hopefully covered most bits. Like I said, I'm going to do a written version of this blog as well, which is on my website, so check that out. There's a bit more info covered in there, and I talk a bit more about some of the things and why I use some of the settings. Hopefully you find that interesting. I'm going to get my next video up soon. I'm doing a couple of different videos. I'm going to do one video on panning shots, which if you guys check out my Instagram, you'll see I've got a few panning shots of cars and stuff and planes, and some people have asked me about that, so I'm going to do one of those, which should be cool. I'm going to do a fairly detailed video on my behind the goal remote camera for football, one of my next football games, and of course I've got my behind the scenes stuff coming on my Instagram this week, which hopefully you guys will see and you will enjoy as well. So thanks a lot for watching, guys. I appreciate it. As always, please like, comment, let me know. See you soon.